Samuel Finley Breese Morse spent the first 35 years of his life learning to paint. He went to Yale and studied art. He went to Andover and also to the Royal Academy of Art in London. And he focused most of his efforts at learning the techniques of the masters, and it paid off. He learned about how Michelangelo could draw bodies that seemed to pulse and shudder if he would use the right application of oil and connect shadows in just the right way. He studied how Raphael could capture just a little spark of life by painting a tiny white fleck in the auburn eye of a noble person. He learned how to create illusions that matter in art, illusions of space and distance through the aggregation and approximation of that space on lines across canvas. And by 1825, Morse was doing pretty well at the painting game. He was living in New Haven, Connecticut with his wife Lucretia and 2 sons. They had a 3rd son who was on his way to be born any day. And at that time, one night, a note arrived for Morse from the city of New York. They wanted to pay him $1,000 in 1825 money, to come to Washington, D.C. and paint a portrait of the Revolutionary War hero, the Marquis de Lafayette, while he was visiting and celebrating the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Revolution. And Lafayette was willing to sit for Morse. This was a good get for him if he would come right away while he was still in Washington, D.C. So Morse packed a bag, rolled up his paintbrushes and his easel and a couple of canvases, and he kissed his wife goodbye and left that night to travel for 6 days on rough early 19th century roads to Washington, D.C. So a week later, Morse was in his rented studio in Washington, in the new capital, getting ready for the arrival the next day of the Marquis de Lafayette. He had bought a new set of clothes so that he would look good for someone of that statue. And he was just getting ready when another courier knocked on the door. And when he answered, the courier was out of breath and road-worn from having traveled as quickly as possible with a note for Morse. And it was 5 words long. It said, "Your dear wife is convalescent." So he dropped what he was doing and he left that night and rode for 6 days, partly on horseback, partly in the back of a very heavy-laden, very bumpy wagon that was headed north, wrapped in blankets as winter was arriving in New England. And when he finally made it back 5 nights later to New Haven, he ran up the steps of his house, walked inside, and discovered that his wife was dead. In fact, she had died the night before the courier had even delivered the message to him in Washington, D.C. She had been buried already at some point while he was making his travels up to New Haven. And so Samuel Finley Breese Morse, after that night, spent the next 33 years of his life trying to figure out a way so that no one ever again would have to feel the way that he felt that night when he got home. He spent the next 30 years inventing and then perfecting the telegraph machine, and also developing Morse code, which isn't that different from painting. It's dots and lines that stretch across paper, but also stretch across distance and time. Nathaniel Green writes a great biography about Samuel Morse, and one that's not just eloquent, but puts you in the moment. You know, connection is the ingredient in life that I think we all want, maybe more than anything else. We long for it. And when we lose it, or when it's suddenly taken from us, it can feel terrifying. Connection to one another, a place where we fit, or that's our community. Connection to something bigger than us, to the divine, to what we would call God, or, you know that that's important to people, and you know it because when something does disrupt it, our connections to others, especially the people that we hold dear, nothing feels worse. Nothing churns in us like the feeling of disconnection. For all of our intelligence and power, all of our individual expression and social status, what any of us want at our core is a sense of connection. Jean Vanier writes that community and connection are a sign that love is possible in a materialistic world where people so often either ignore or fight each other. They are a sign that we don't need a lot of money or power to be happy. Quite the opposite. And in fact, what we see in this text from John and the promise of Jeremiah in our first reading is that connection is actually written into our nature and our character by God right from the very beginning. It's God's deepest wish for humanity. It's God's dream for people. In John, this text is Jesus' prayer. And it's an important prayer, by the way. We've been talking about prayer during Lent. It's an important one. He prays it right before he sends the disciples off, right before he's arrested and has to traverse all of the journey to the cross. It's at this very critical moment. And he prays and he describes this close, loving relationship between Jesus and God the Creator. And he says, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us. May they be one as we are one. That's Jesus' prayer. It's his prayer as he prepares to leave the disciples to carry on his mission and whatever it is he started, that's his prayer for them as they are given the baton to carry forward. It's also, that means, his prayer for us, that we may be one with him and one with each other. In fact, in this Lenten season, as we are talking about prayer, this is what I'm really thankful for about prayer, is that prayer draws us together. That's what keeps me praying. Because sometimes my prayers are answered and sometimes they're not. But prayer draws us together. Bridges gaps. Jesus, when he prays for the disciples, he assumes that they have some kind of role to play in the next chapter that connects all of us to Jesus. And that through the struggles and the challenges in the places where we question or hurt, that God will be present in the presence of his people. So Jesus is praying, for protection for the disciples and the church, but it's more active than that. He's praying that we would be one, that our work and our mission would align with the work that God is already doing, and that in spite of difference and in spite of the fact that we're very disconnected sometimes, the disconnectedness of the human condition wouldn't stop us, but we would move forward in one accord. Jesus prays for us. And then he goes on and he carries the cross and he goes through the trials and eventually onto the resurrection. He's assuming that we have a critical part to play in the salvation story, that it doesn't end with him. And so, sometimes we pray for things and for others or a situation, and it can be frustrating when a prayer doesn't happen. We can say, well, God didn't answer my prayer. But sometimes I think it's possible that God doesn't answer a prayer because we are the answer to prayer that we're looking for. Don't ask God to take care of the lost. Don't ask God to clothe the naked or feed the hungry if your pantry is full. You could be an answer to that prayer. It's time for us to step into the story of creation and continue the work that God started. Don't pray for peace in the world or for justice unless you are willing to go to those people with which you have no peace and try to make peace, to reconcile. We all have power to make peace. Last fall, I went to Philadelphia for a dialogue event. I told some of you about it. I put an article about it in the newsletter as well. It was on a hard topic. It was on the place of LGBTQ persons in the church and in God's family. It's something that is straining our denomination, but it's not unique to us. I don't know a church, I don't know a denomination, heck, I don't know a family that isn't having this conversation because of the ways that LGBTQ persons are coming out and are feeling freer to be more open about themselves. And I have to tell you, I have never known anyone, inclusive or traditional, progressive or conservative, straight or gay, Christian or secular, who didn't bathe their thoughts on this topic and their conversations in prayer, or if not religious, at least some kind of rumination or meditation. And so at this dialogue I went to, where most people were from evangelical traditions that are much more conservative than even the most conservative of Methodists, by their own description, Christians for Social Action brought together persons who were 6 people who were either lesbian and gay themselves, or affirming, or family members of, alongside 6 traditional-minded folks who want to be kind-hearted while staying faithful to their worldview and their view of marriage. And we would just ask questions of one another. We spent 12 weeks before we went to Philadelphia writing questions to one another and offering reflections and trying to be honest and answering, telling about what we believe and why about the body and about marriage and sex and sexuality. And, there are a lot of different opinions flying around. And then in the week before the dialogue, the leader of this dialogue, her name was Kirsten, she wrote to all of us and she said, now the last step is we're gonna stop talking for a week before we come to Philadelphia, but I need you to think of one person who has rubbed you the wrong way the most during all of this pre-talk, who has bothered you, and where you're struggling to find commonality, and you have to pray for that person. And I can tell you, out of the 12 strangers that I was invited to pray for, it took me about a half a second to know exactly who the right person was. I'm going to call her Melissa. That's not her real name. But as I had been reading her responses to questions, or I would see her comments about the issue, I knew that we were so different. And what's more, she just had a way of saying things that really kind of ticked me off. And I'd spent some time really kind of fantasizing about how I would respond to her and how I would pick her apart. And how, this is great strategy for going into a dialogue. I'll just go in and rip a person apart. What could go wrong? And Kristen, all this time, Kristen, our leader, was saying, you need to think about whoever the Melissa is for you and really pray for her in these 6 days ahead before we meet in person. I didn't want to do it. What I wanted to pray was that she would see the light, and she would, that's what God does, right? Is they help people to see just the way I see it, because if I didn't think of it that way, then that would be the wrong way to think about it. And imagine my surprise when I first met Melissa and quickly saw what a warm, loving, gentle person she was. Imagine my disappointment when she didn't turn out to be a boogeyman and instead talked lovingly about her daughter who struggles with epilepsy and the way that has called her to want to think about people who are different in a loving way, and even led her, by the way, to found a daycare in Miami that specializes in children with epilepsy so that parents aren't terrified to leave their children alone for fear of them having a random seizure one day. Would have medical professionals there. How her love for her daughter made her think about that. Imagine how embarrassed I was when she told me on a long walk through the grounds of this retreat center during a break about how when Kirsten invited everyone to pray, that she knew right away that she had to pray for me. And I tried not to laugh because she's being vulnerable, right? But because she just felt like anything I wrote was just a little too smug and self-assured in my responses, which I was surprised by because I'm such a humble person. It's one of my best qualities. And we're friends today. We talk every once in a while, not all the time, but once a month or so. And I really do believe that those 6 days of prayer made us friends. Prayer brought out love where there wasn't any. Prayer made us one as Jesus and God are one. Prayer bridged the gap of distance in attitude. And that is not to be a Pollyanna and to say that it's not easy. It's not. We are all so divided, and we're doing such a good job of dividing ourselves. But it is to say that I know I need Melissa in my life. That's what we need to know also in United Methodism right now. If you were at the dialogue last night, or at the panel discussion last night, then you got to hear from Mark Holland, and you know that our denomination, this place where, whether we were raised in it or we found our way to it, it's been a hope and a refuge for so many of us, and a place where we learned about God's love, and that God's love was real and a thing for all of us. And as we get ready for our general conference, where delegates will prayerfully and carefully decide what our church is going to look like, maybe for decades to come, and will this be a turning of the page, we have to acknowledge that we have struggled and we failed to be one. Whatever Jesus was praying for, we have not lived up to it. For 50 years, we've gotten better at pushing plans and pushing our agendas, and we haven't been worrying too much about praying for one another. Now, the thing is, I think what we have failed to do at General Conference, we know how to do in church. Because we have to see each other every Sunday. We have to eat at fish fries together and work together. They just have to see each other every 4 years. I don't have to pray that hard for people I don't see that often. But the people that I see every day, I have to pray for them. Because the truth of the matter is we are connected. And even where you're different, I need you. I need your wisdom. I need your courage. I need your courage to believe when I'm feeling doubt. I need your kindness to know that we're friends and we're connected. Prayer becomes this bridge that doesn't change the other person's attitude. It changes us just enough to where we're amenable to one another and we can be one. And that's all well and good, but I have bad news for you. You need me too. You need me too. I mean, the fact is we're all in this together. When hardship strikes, when we lose family, when, I don't know, we lose a staff member and a friend from this church because of people racing and being dumb on the streets, we need one another. And so Jesus prays, may they be one. As Jesus and God are one, may we be one. Connected across space and time, may we be one. So let us pray. Gracious God, we use church speak sometimes to talk about you as the Trinity, which is a confusing doctrine, but a beautiful picture of how effortlessly you live in community, even with yourself and within yourself. Now, we're more broken and we're better at bickering, and it's hard for us. But you sent Jesus to show us that we can be one, and maybe the first step is right where he started with prayer. So may we be one. Here at St. John's, here as witnesses with other churches in Albuquerque and all throughout the world, may we be one. May we be one. Through prayer, through Christ, through grace, may we be one. Amen.